Okay, welcome everyone to another round of the Bolt-A-Thon. Oh, cool. We have Andreas Antonopoulos here.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
Hi, Andrea.
Uh, yeah, shout out to Anton. All right. We have the wonderful Lisa Neigut, joining us. She also goes by Nifty9 Twitter. She's from Blockstream, and she's going to be talking about Sea Lightning. You can take it away.
Great. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Fast Strike. Today I'm going to be I'm calling it an orientation guide to Sea Lightning. And I said to Bitcoin D, but we probably won't really talk too much about Bitcoin D. I'll try and explain why I thought they're very similar, but yeah, okay. Anyways, so yeah, thanks for tuning in. This is Fast Strike. So what we're going to be doing today is basically I'm going to kind of pretend that you're someone who is new to Sea Lightning. So like audience-wise, that's kind of who this is targeted to, or you want to learn more about kind of where all the parts are to Sea Lightning, how this stuff fits together. So we're going to start by kind of pretending that we've already like gone to the GitHub page and cloned the repo, but you haven't, and you've already installed like all the dependencies, but you haven't built the project yet. I'm also kind of assuming that OS-wise, you're using Ubuntu. I run Ubuntu 18.04, so all the stuff that I'm going to be doing works on my machine, but I think some of the build instructions are a little bit different for other platforms. So those are all in the installing doc though, so you should be able to see them. But again, I'm just going to be walking through the ones that work for the Ubuntu install path. Okay, great. So let me check to make sure I hit everything on my list. Cool. Okay, so right. So I'm on the, let's see, I'm in Lightning. I've downloaded the source so you can kind of see this is like basically if you download it and then CD into the repo, this is sort of what you'll see. I've got a lot of stuff that's already been made just so that when I make it, it'll run faster. So mine won't take as long as yours will. But anyways, so like we're in Lightning, let's pretend we've just like downloaded it. And so I'm installing, I want to make it. So I'm going to look at, a good place to look is at doc install.md. So this is all the install instructions on how to install or build on different stuff. We're doing Ubuntu, so I'm going to go to the Ubuntu instructions. And like I said, again, I'm kind of pretending you've already done all this install stuff. And you've already cloned Lightning. We're here, we're building. Okay, cool. So there's 3 steps to building Lightning. The first one is configure, then there's make, and then there's this sudo make install, which is like this one here. Like this is sort of optional, but I'll explain why that is in a second. Okay, cool. So let's start with configure. What is configure? Great question. So sometimes when I get a script and I don't know what it does, what I like to do is ask it to help me out. So I say help. So what configure is like a script. And basically the idea is that it's gonna run and check all the like libraries and packages and all those like dependencies that I said you needed to install before you run the build steps. It kind of goes through and checks to see what all is like turned on your, like what all you have installed, and sets up a couple of environment variables then that make will use when it's building. So there's a couple of options that we can set using configure that then make will use, which was the second step, for when it's building the actual binaries. And so here's a list, it gives it to us. So you can see some stuff like up here about the defaults. This is like what the compiler is, some compiling flags, option flags, debug flags. This is all for the compiler. Again, when make runs, make's gonna use all of these variables that the configure script sets. It's got some information about Vagrant and PyTest, but what I kind of want to draw your attention to is a couple of these flags that we can enable or disable at the configure step. I think there's other ways to do it at make, but I always use configure to change them. One is that you can enable or disable developer mode. You'll notice that it's disabled by default. You can enable or disable the experimental features here. This copy is wrong. It probably needs to be updated. This is, anyways. Compatibility mode is enabled by default. Valgrind, this is like a It's used, so we want Valgrind on if we're going to be running the unit tests, because it does a lot of checking to make sure that the memory usage of your program is correct, like that you, that's going to take me a lot of time to explain. So I'm going to kind of like skim over it, but just know that it's like a tool that you want to have on when you're running tests, because it helps find problems in the code you've written related to memory usage. Then there's some static, like linking static library stuff. And then finally, this is like the address sanitizer, which I think is another, Valgrind and the address sanitizer like do very similar things in that they deal with like your memory usage of the program you're running. You really don't want to have Valgrind and address sanitizer on at the same time, which is why it's disabled by default. Anyways, okay, so that's kind of like a long intro to what all the configure options are. When I configure, I want to, I just did this, so it probably won't change too much, but I want to enable a developer. I also want to enable the experimental features. What experimental features are available really varies depending on what version of C Lightning you're running. Sometimes we have experimental features and sometimes we don't. And I don't know what the easiest way is to like look and see what all the experimental features are for a build. But I'm gonna think about that and probably tweet something out if I come up with it. And then there was another one that I wanted. Oh, I was gonna just disable compat because why not? Cool, okay. So then I'm gonna go ahead and run configure. It's gonna basically, like it checks to make sure that you've installed different Python libraries. Yeah, like do I have SQLite 3? Yes, great, okay. And if you run into any problems or you're missing anything, it'll stop and issue a warning, and then you'll have a chance to fix it before you actually run make. Okay, so it checks you have a bunch of stuff, it writes some variables, and then it sets all of these config flags, basically. So you can see Valgrind is turned on. It has me as a developer, which means I'll be able to use any of the developer commands, which we'll get to a bit later. Experimental features are turned on. Ooh, compat's turned off. I thought I turned that on. Nope, I turned it off. Okay, I disabled compat, so that's off. PyTest is set up, so that's there. And then you can see static's off. ASAN's that address sanitizer that we saw. And this is new as of .8. So if you're not using like the latest or master, on master you won't see this, but this is just saying that the test network we're set to using is regtest. And this is related to some stuff I'll get into a little bit later about how the Lightning directory has been changed for .8. Okay, cool, so that's configured, we've configured it, great. Okay, so the next step, if we go back to, back up here to doc install.md, the next step was make. When I run make, I like to run it using the jobs flag. I think that you can do this, I know that, so I think you can do it like with nproc, which is the number of processors that your hardware has, and we'll set it. And then I also like quiet, just because it doesn't print a whole bunch of stuff out. Great, so what that's doing is it's making the project, J stands for the jobs flag. So that's like how many processes to run in parallel when it's doing make. So I know, like I said, it's running like 8 separate processes. So anyways, it's like 8 jobs at a time, kind of like a work queue. And then quiet again is so it doesn't print a whole bunch of stuff out. If you run into trouble when you're trying to make the project, it's a good idea to turn off both, to just run make without these flags, without the jobs flag and without quiet. And the reason for that is that make as a, maybe I should run it, I should change something and run it again so you can see the stuff that it outprints. But basically when you run make is basically a long set of basically like shell commands, more or less. They get run kind of sequentially, or like there's like a build dependency graph that it runs. And every single command gets printed out. So if you run it without jobs, they get run sequentially. And then if it hits the error, you'll know that the last printed command is the one that ran the error. And so then instead of trying to debug the whole make script, all you have to do is debug the last command that it ran, and you can just copy paste it into your terminal and run it yourself until you figure out kind of what's going on or what's wrong. Anyway, so that's some tips on how to debug make. Okay, great. So now we've made it. So now, now we should have two binaries. Well, actually we have like a bunch of binaries. So what Make does, it builds like a bunch of test binaries, a bunch of binaries that we need to run L&D. It builds a bunch of tool stuff. So there's stuff in tools. It builds a couple of plugins. Basically anything in any of the Make files in the project gets made when we run Make. And it's like a lot of stuff, but there's only really like two binaries that it's built that we're really going to interact with as a user. I might explain what some of the others are, but right, and those are Lightning CLI, which is in CLI if we look in Lightning. So if we look in CLI, this is a directory. It just built this one here, Lightning CLI, which is a command line tool that we'll use. And then it also built Lightning D is in Lightning D directory. So we can see there's a lot of stuff in here. So it built all these, but the only one that we're really going to touch is this one. So all these yellow things are basically like programs or binaries that that are like you can basically execute, if that makes sense, from the command line. But again, we're only going to deal with Lightning CLI and Lightning D. Cool. So the last thing that we've done, so basically we've made the project. It's on our computer. We can run Lightning now. But this last one is, and like I said, it's kind of optional, but it's nice to do, is because it takes those binaries and it installs them into your system path, which is basically like whenever I want to type like something like, let's say I want to look up like man pages, right? So I do like man, the man page of like man, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but man info. Anyways, like, so it'll actually take all of the documentation for a lot of the C Lightning commands that we'll get to a little bit later. And it installs them all into like your manual database so that like, if I have a question about how a Lightning command works, I can say Lightning, let's say fun channel, and then it will open up the man page for it. So here's all the instructions on how Lightning fun channel works, which is cool. And again, so the way that you get that is by running sudo make install. This is going to make me type in my password. Hopefully. Nope. Okay. That's cool. Cool. Right. So, yeah, we can like look through what all it's doing. Right, so it's basically making some directories, making sure that your directories exist, like these man page ones that it's going to copy stuff into, and then it goes ahead and it installs. Remember I said earlier, Make just prints all of the commands that it runs. Like, so this is all the commands that it ran exactly. It installed Lightning CLI and Lightning D in your user local bin. So this means basically if I it installed a bunch of these other little binaries that we need, also in a libexec folder for it. Anyway, so like basically it takes all the Lightning stuff and puts it into your system such that you can access it from anywhere on your computer instead of inside of the Lightning directory. Great, okay, so those are the 3 steps it takes to build and configure, make, and then install C Lightning onto your Ubuntu machine. Great, okay, so now that we've got C Lightning installed, let me check my crib notes to make sure that I've got all that stuff. Okay, great. All right, let's talk about these 2 binaries, Lightning D and Lightning CLI. What's the difference between them? How was I supposed to do this? Okay, cool. Let's see. Okay, so last time we wanted to know what a binary was up to, we ran the help command, right? So there's Lightning D. Let's see what it says when we say help. That prints out a bunch of stuff. So it says, let's see, Lightning D is the Bitcoin Lightning daemon. The default values are shown for the network testnet. Great, so basically Lightning D is like the daemon, or Lightning daemon itself. So this is the one that's gonna be talking to other nodes on Lightning. It's gonna have control over the wallet. It maintains all of the HTLCs and payments. It keeps records of like who's paid, all of your invoices, any and everything that you think of when you think of like the Lightning node is Lightning D. And Lightning D has a bunch of like configuration options. That's what we can see here, basically. So when you say help, it prints out basically what all of the config options are for Lightning D, which is cool. And they have like a kind of good description. So if you're curious about what all you can set or configure for Lightning D, this is a good way to find it. I think this is all of them. It might be missing some. But yeah, no, maybe that's all of them. Probably all of them. Okay. Oh, and so like these ones at the bottom here that are all dev, since we compiled as developer, these are like available options that we can configure. Okay, great. And I'll go into where you configure stuff in a second. But basically, if you wanted to like configure like it to run as a daemon, you would just like basically set it as flags, if that makes sense. So you can set configs, any of these configs up here, you can set as at the command line when you run Lightning D. Great, okay. So let's see. Oh, okay, what was the other one? Lightning CLI. Cool. Okay, so what is the help for Lightning CLI? It has similar stuff to Lightning D. It's got like a config file, a Lightning directory. It wants to know what network you're on. It wants to know what an RPC file is or where the RPC file is. We can print this message. It's got some other things for how we print output, like JSON raw, and then two things, keywords in order, and then like a version. Okay, so Lightning CLI basically is going to be the method that we talk to, or it's the way that we talk to Lightning D. So usually the way that when you're running Lightning D is a daemon that runs in the background. So you start it up, and usually when I run Lightning D, you definitely run it as a daemon so that it's just like running in the background on your machine. And then when you want to interact with it, you would use Lightning CLI to issue commands to it. So one such command would be like help. And this isn't gonna work because I don't have any of this stuff running. Yeah, so it's okay. So Lightning CLI doesn't even say anything about, like, it can't even run a help command. Why is that? Well, the error that it's giving us is that it says connecting to the RPC, Lightning RPC, there's no such file or directory. Okay, so this is how, so kind of what I want to like highlight in this like segment right now is the relationship between Lightning CLI and Lightning D is that Lightning CLI is like a very simple wrapper around JSON RPC 2.0. So let me like, just open up like a scratch file. Did I just kill it? Sorry. Okay, so if I go to just like a bolts. Okay, so where was I? Basically, Lightning CLI. So Lightning D basically runs something kind of called a JSON RPC 2.0 server. RPC 2.0 server, which basically means it like has a socket opening. It opens up a socket. So Lightning D has like a socket. Lightning D has a socket. Lightning D has a socket, which because this is like Linux or Unix philosophy on the file system, that's going to look like a file. So basically, when Lightning D starts up and it's running, it creates this file on disk that looks like, I think it's called Lightning RPC. Lightning RPC, and we'll talk about, we'll go look for this in a second. So I'll show you where everything is. But so basically it opens up, creates a socket. So any client that wants to talk to Lightning D, all it has to do basically is send and receive or like read and write from this file on disk called the Lightning RPC, which looks like a file, but it's actually like a live socket to the Lightning D daemon. Lightning D daemon on the other side is waiting to get commands to it written out basically over this like file. And the format of that all the commands are in is JSON RPC 2.0. So basically like when you have a client, what it's going to be writing over to Lightning D is going to be something like ID of the request number and then a command name that's like help, and then any arguments. Maybe they call them, I think they call them params. Yeah, so this is like, so Lightning CLI basically generates a command like this as JSON, basically like this, and then writes it to the file. So then it's going to write to Lightning RPC. And then Lightning D is going to get that message, comes up with a response, and then writes back JSON to the socket, which is Lightning RPC, which is kind of cool. Okay, so we can kind of see how this works. To kind of make this a little more concrete, let's go ahead and just like look at what the code for Lightning CLI looks like. So if we go to, so again, it's in the, if you can like down here, this is where I'm opening files, it'll be, you can kind of like see where they are. So I'm gonna open up CLI, and it's just called Lightning CLI.c because it is a single file. Right, great. So here's the top, it says it's a helper to submit via JSON RPC and get back a response. So all that Lightning CLI does is it takes what we write on the command line. So when we write Lightning, so if we did like, okay, so like an example would be Lightning CLI, fund channel, and then you do something like node ID, amount, and then like fee rate, right? All that Lightning CLI is gonna do is take what we've written on the command line, translate that into a JSON message, pass the JSON message over the RPC socket to Lightning D. Lightning D will take it, process it, and then send us JSON back. And then when the Lightning CLI gets it back, it prints it to us like however you want. Which when, if you remember, Lightning CLI help, there were like a couple options we could pass it about how we wanted to see it when it comes back, which is cool. Another short aside is since all Lightning CLI is doing is taking the arguments that we type on the command line and translating that to JSON. There's two options for Lightning CLI that kind of change how it understands what you've passed in, if that makes sense. Basically, if you didn't want to write like Lightning CLI, and I'll show you this in like a sec. I'll show you how this like works like later on when we're actually writing commands. But if you didn't want to write fun channel, let's say fun channel has like 100 things you can pass in. Which it does, and we can see that with the man page. So if we go to Lightning Fun Channel, which will open up the man page, you'll notice that there's like a bunch of things that we can pass in, and as they're in brackets, that means they're optional, right? So if I wanted to pass in UTXOs, but I didn't want to pass in fee rate announce or like a min confirmation, then I'd have to like figure out a way to do that if I like put them all in, or you can use, let's quit this, or you can use the keyword K, and then you could say like the ID of this is like node ID, and then min conf equals like 10 or whatever, for example. And that's using keywords instead of the order of the stuff as you type it in. Okay, maybe that was a little esoteric, but kind of useful information to know. Great, okay, so now that we've got that, let me check where we are on, oh, okay, great. Kind of already did all these, access control of the socket file, config options. Okay, cool. Right, so let's like finish looking through this because I think it's just kind of interesting to see. Typically in a C file, when you're looking for interesting, like kind of the meat of the file is going to be at the bottom. So here we are. So again, like all that Lightning CLI is like a very simple command line program. All programs in C have a main like entry point. So like whenever you call C Lightning CLI and then type in some arguments, the first thing that's going to happen is that it's going to go to main with this RPC stands for arg count. That's the number of arguments that you sent it. And argv is the array of the stuff. So just to like, oops, this over here. Right, so where did the thing go? So like Lightning CLI, fun channel, hello, 1, 2, 3, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arguments, so argc would be 5, and then this list would be this list of arguments here, if that makes sense. Cool, okay, so that's how main works. Great, okay, so let's just kind of see what it does. It does some initial configuration of parsing some options. So basically this is if you pass in some command line options that, that were like where the config file is, what the Lightning directory is, what the name of the RPC file is, this method will go in and parse that out and put it into variables so we know where they are. Here we're registering all those great options that we saw. So when we did Lightning CLI -- help, this one here, it prints out all this information, so that's cool. I'm just gonna skip over. If there's no method, if you didn't pass anything in, it's gonna just go ask Lightning D for what all the available RPC commands are, so it defaults to help if you don't pass anything in. Which is to say, if we just called, Lightning CLI, it would, yeah, it just queries Lightning D for available commands, but Lightning isn't running right now, which is fine. Maybe I should get Lightning going. Anyways, what I kind of wanted to show off in here is where it connects to the socket. Oh, right, I said I would show you where the socket is. I should do that. Okay. So basically, here's where we like set up a socket connection with a file descriptor and go ahead and connect to the socket. And then here's where we build those JSON. Remember how I was saying we use JSON 2.0 RPC? This is where we're building that just like JSON with some params in it. Here we're putting the method name. So like fun channel would go here, and then an ID that we've generated so we can keep track of stuff. And then we also insert all of the params. Basically like pretty much exactly what we were talking about here. Okay, cool. So you can see that happening in Lightning CLI, which is kind of cool. Okay, I need to go a little faster. I'm running out of time. Okay, cool. So that's basically what this does. It prints it. So basically it writes it over to, so here's write all, we write it all. We write everything to the file descriptor, which was the socket. And then we write the whole command that we just generated. And then we just read off. Here it is. Here we start just reading back whatever the response is. So like Lightning CLI takes your request, writes it over to Lightning D, waits for a response, and then chunks it back to you. Cool. And that's basically what the whole thing is. All of this down here is like the options about how to print it, how to make it print out. So there's different options about how it will print when it looks. That's it. That's all of Lightning CLI. We have just looked at basically more or less the entirety of what one of the 2 binaries that you install when you install Lightning D is doing, which is kind of cool. Lightning D is a little more complicated, so we won't be going into it quite as much detail. But yeah, cool. Okay, so that's Lightning CLI. Let me check my list of what I wanted to talk about. Oh, let me show you where the socket file is. Okay, so cool. So this is my dev machine. So I don't really have like, hang on. Lightning. Okay, so this is like, so the default Lightning directory when you install C Lightning is in your home directory .lightning, which is very similar to Bitcoin because Bitcoin is usually your home directory .bitcoin. And then you have Lightning right next to it, which is cool. See, this is why it's also about Bitcoin D, because it's similar to how Lightning works. Yeah, so I've got some stuff in here. We recently, so if you've already been running C Lightning, what I've got in my Lightning directory, default Lightning directory, might be a little different than what you're used to seeing. And the reason for that is that as of .8, which is the release that's coming out on the 10th, or next week sometime, our first RC1 should definitely be launched by the 1st, is the plan. That's the goal anyway. So next week we should be dropping a new version of Lightning, at least the release candidate. Anyway, so we're basically like restructuring how the config directory, or how the Lightning directory is like architected, if that makes sense. It used to be that everything for the Lightning directory was in this top level. So .lightning, this ls.lightning would have just one set of things in it, but we've made it such that you can run, there's like 3 or 4, you can run Lightning on a bunch of different networks, like testnet or mainnet. So we're pushing everything down into, what do you call it? Subdirectories. So here, for example, we've got a testnet subdirectory because that's the default one that starts. There's nothing in it because I haven't run it yet. Okay, so I think before we get too much further, sorry, I'm kind of bouncing around. Oh, here, you can see this here, this Lightning RPC. And the old style of how, so in the old style of configs, there's only 4 files in here. It's gossip store, HSM secret, Lightning SQL 3, and an RPC file. But let's take a like short pause on this stuff. And I'm going to show you this kind of, it's not really a pause, but show you a pretty nice script that lets you run Lightning locally. Kind of, I use it for development. It's really good for testing things out quickly without having to like write a test for it. It's called, I call it startup regtest. So if you're familiar with Bitcoin development at all, you'll know that there's 3 networks you can run Bitcoin on. There's mainnet, which is the one that has money and actual real value. There's testnet, which is like mainnet, except that the coins aren't worth anything. But you still have to wait for miners to mine blocks, and it's a network, and there's like a bunch of other nodes on the network. And then there's regtest, which is, reg I think is short for regression testing. So basically it's meant to be a local chain that only exists on my computer, and I have the control. I can generate new blocks basically by issuing a command, and we'll do that here shortly. The nice thing about this, God, I'm gonna run out of time. Okay, the nice thing about this is that it's really quick to use because you can just generate new blocks. So what I wanna do is there's a script that is in the C Lightning repo that you can, you have to source it in order to get it to work because it has aliases which make using it like kind of nice. So basically, it's in the contrib folder, which has a lot of kind of like community submissions that are nice to have, but you don't really need, and they're not really compiled. They're just like little scripts and things. I'll show you some other stuff in there in a second. Great, so I'm gonna source this, and it says, okay, great, like, here's where your Lightning CLI is that I'll be using whenever you run stuff on here, and here's where Lightning D is. It doesn't print all the commands that you need, so I just happen to know them, but if you wanted to go and look at usage for it, if you go to startup regtest, it's got some instructions that tells you more about it, and then here's the first one, we'll start up the node set. It's kind of like hard-coded to only start up sorry, I have a puppy and she's not happy. It's okay, baby. Okay, so basically, like, so this starts up it starts up a local Bitcoin D because you have to have Bitcoin D running locally in regtest mode. And then it also starts up 2 Lightning nodes that you can use to like talk to each other, open channels between. And so there's a couple commands that it prints out. L1 CLI is the same as running Lightning CLI, but for that first node. So you point it at the Lightning directory. And the Lightning directory for these are in the temp directory. So this one, L1 regtest, and then, anyways. So that is the same. So like calling L1 CLI is the same as typing out all of this. Cool. So we can actually, so the reason that I wanted to start that up is I wanted to show you what its Lightning directory looks like, which is in, again, these are hard-coded. So if you run contrib startup test regtest, all of your stuff will be in the exact same place as where I'm looking at right now. So temp regtest, like I said, so this is new as of 0.8. So if you download and build and run master, this is what you'll see. If you have an older version of C Lightning, you won't have this regtest subdirectory. Everything in regtest will be up a level. Cool. So here's what's in regtest. So here's what's in like our Lightning directory. We have a gossip store. This is where all of the gossip from any node that we get gets stored. Cool. It's a flat file. We use a proprietary like data packing binary, whatever, anyways, it's just a big flat file with all the data in it that like all the gossip stuff in C Lightning knows how to parse and then read. Kind of like a tape drive. If you think of it like a tape drive, that's really similar to how gossip store stuff works. You just like read it off disk and pull it into memory because you use, like, one reason that we keep gossip around is that it's how we build routes between nodes, and gossip store is where we keep it. Okay, cool. Then there's HSM secret and the Lightning D SQLite kind of database. So this is like the database where all the information is. HSM secret and Lightning D SQL together basically make up your wallet. The SQLite, so the database also stores all of your information and state for all of your channels. So if you lose it, you're probably going to lose all your money because you won't be able to close any channels because you don't have any of your revocation tokens or any of the current state where your partner is in state channel updates. You don't want to lose that. And then HSM secret is your BIP 32, I think it's 32 or 34, I always forget. One of those, basically it's your seed for the hierarchical deterministic wallet in format just on disk. Yeah, so you don't want to send this to anyone, or this either. You don't want to send either of these to anyone. Anyways, okay, great. And then here's Lightning RPC. This is that socket file that we're talking about. This is kind of cool if you do, if we list everything in here, you can see that it's a socket file by this little S here at the front, which is cool. I mean, it's also highlighted purple. That means something, and it's doesn't have size, but the little S up front is the file type is a socket. So it's a socket. It's been written in as a socket, which is cool. These here for directory, and then dashes are just like normal files. So everything else is a normal file. Okay, cool. Where the heck were we? Okay. Oh, right. So access control. You'll notice that there's really no access control around any of these socket files or HSM stuff or your database. So if you're running Lightning, you want to make sure you're running it on a machine that you have a lot of control over and that not very many other people do, and that you are able to lock down the file system access to that particular directory, because anyone who gets at it will basically have all of the money that's on your node. Okay, cool. And we'll be able to talk to, like, anyone who could talk to that RPC file. There's like no checking with passwords or anything. Yeah, at least I think that's correct. Pretty sure that's true. Anyways, yeah. Careful who you give access to your stuff for. Great, okay, so I have about 20 minutes, maybe like 15 minutes. I've got a lot of stuff to talk about, but yeah, I think we can do it. Okay, I wanted to talk about the config, some of the config options for Lightning D. We did the intro to regtest. We did that, okay. Okay, cool. So I'll do just like this quick little, so earlier I tried calling help, but it didn't work. Now, again, so L1 CLI is the same as calling lightning-CLI. It's just all done locally and like works. So what this is gonna do is this is gonna actually kind of like tie the loop or like show you an example of issuing an RPC call over JSON. So this is going to issue an RPC call on JSON to Lightning D. So the Lightning D that I have running is going to respond to this, and it's going to print back all of the commands that it knows that we can run against it. Cool. Actually, let me just type that into less so that we can see what's going on here. Okay, cool. So these are like basically all the commands that you can call, and then everything after the first word is like the arguments for it. And then if they're in brackets, that means it's optional, which is kind of cool. And then here, like, these are the options that you can pass into address type because they're like in brackets. So you can get a new address that's either batch 32 or SegWit, and it defaults to batch 32. It's cool. Okay, so yeah, here's all the commands you can call for C Lightning. Great stuff. Here's all the dev stuff, which we can do. All these developer things are things that we can call because we configured to be in developer mode. So these are all available to us. I don't know if they print out if you're not in dev mode. Someone else should like compile it and find out. Cool. So you'll notice that that's a lot different than running help, right? That's because help itself, we can change the format that it's printed out in. So to show you that it's actually JSON, I'm just going to print it out as JSON. So this is the whole JSON command that Lightning D sent back to Lightning CLI. And so by passing in this -J flag, I just say, hey, just print out whatever Lightning D sends you instead of formatting it to make it look nice. You can actually pass in H as like human readable, which I don't know how human readable you think this is, but this is just like the JSON kind of compacted into this stuff. And then help is kind of special. I don't know if you, oh, hey, Andrew.
Hey, so we had one question from the audience.
Yeah.
The question is it bad to run more than one Lightning node on top of Bitcoin when testing on mainnet?
On mainnet? I don't think that's a problem. No.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Right. Okay, cool. Yeah. Great. Okay, so that was just a quick example, just kind of to help drive home this idea that all that Lightning CLI is a wrapper around JSON RPC stuff. Cool. Okay, what else I have? Sorry. Introduce tests. Oh, I wanted to go through some config options for Lightning D and then list configs. Okay, cool. So let's do a really quick config chat. I've got like 10 minutes left before we go to like open question time. So I'm going to try and get through some configs for Lightning D, what they are. And then I'd really like to get through, oh, there's a lot of stuff here. All right, let's just, we're not going to get to all of this. Okay. Great. Okay, let's talk through a couple configs. I'm trying to decide what's like most helpful. Yeah, okay. Let's talk through a couple configs and then we'll see where we are on time. Okay, so, right. So if you remember, the way that we looked at configs is just by running Lightning D help. And this lists like all the configs that you could set for Lightning D. If you want to see what configs are already set on your node, you would use the list configs command while it's running. The nice thing about being able to call Lightning D help is that Lightning D doesn't actually have to be running in order to show you what all the commands are. So you can see all the configs on it without having it running. But if you do have it running and you want to see what currently set up with, you would call list configs, which is a command. Oops, that was not. Cool. So it shows you like the version, where the directory is, what network we're running on, regression tests, whether or not we're using deprecated APIs, where the RPC file is. It's got a lot of cool information about plugins. Plugins can have configs, so those get listed underneath the plugin options, which is kind of cool. We can see where the wallet is. This is a SQLite database, so it's exactly where we looked at earlier. I've got what color my node is. It's got the alias. What else did I want to point out? This doesn't have the, let's do, wait. Sorry, just because this is nice because it has like an explanation of them. So the ones that I wanted to kind of point out, because there's something that people kind of struggle with a lot when they're trying to set up a new C Lightning, is the address ones. I don't see what those are. Oh, here, so these. So there's three that are kind of interesting, and then offline. Okay, so okay, so when you're setting up a C Lightning node, yeah, I should talk about this. So there's three options about how you expose like your C Lightning node, assuming you're not running over Tor. I'm not talking about how Tor works. That's slightly different. There's like options, configurations that you can do for Tor, which are separate from this, I think. Yeah, V2. So my C Lightning node runs locally on a computer, which is fairly locked down and not a lot of people have access to, but I don't want to use my home network IP address to advertise where my node is. So what I've done basically is I've used bind adder and announce adder, and this is for like my mainnet node. This isn't for like these local, like your regtest node, you just use adder, and I can show you how that works. But basically, I want to bind my C Lightning node to listen locally on a socket that is not where I'm advertising to the world that people can find me. And so I can explain how this works a little bit differently. Okay, so stepping back, this is config, right? Configs are set in, so let's just open up if we go to the temp directory, L1 regtest config. So these are just for the daemons I've been running locally, like L1 and L2. They have a config file, which is the top directory of their Lightning directory. It's not in regtest, though you can, as of .8, you could include, if I wanted another thing, I could have includes. I think it's includes. And then you could have another file here. Another config file. So that's the thing you can do now, but I don't. Anyway, so for these, I'm just using localhost 6060, which is the address. And I've set up I want you to print all the logs, and I want all the logs to be printed into this log file, which makes it easy to inspect the logs whenever I'm running stuff and run into problems. So that's good. Is a daemon, which means it runs in background, and then we've set the network. Cool. So on my actual mainnet node, so I have a server. Let's say that my server is somewhere in California, and the server has an IP address. Let's say it's 222. And I want people to be able to access it. I think it's 9475. I think that's the default. So what I do is I would set my, what's it called? I'd set my announce adder to be wherever the server is, right? But my Lightning node isn't actually there. Let's say that the server is actually talking to my home node over an SSH tunnel. So this is my secret node location. And my secret node location, let's say that these guys, so the server is gonna basically have a port tunnel. Let's say that the port that this on is I don't know, 8080. That's a bad default choice. It's a lot of. Anyway, so then I would want locally, I'd want my secret node to be bound to that, localhost maybe, localhost 8080, if that makes sense. So it's actually gonna send and receive traffic over localhost, which talks SSHD, and the server has some software that does the mapping between 9745 and 8080. But anyway, so basically this is what people will hear that this is where people will think that my node is. But then when locally my node, where it's actually receiving data from, is gonna be here. So that's the difference between announce and bind adder, which is cool. But since they're the same place for these local nodes, all we have to do is set adder, ADDR address, and that does both. Okay, since I'm almost out of time, let's just really quickly kind of go through the process of getting these two nodes that I have running to talk to each other, and maybe quickly go through the process of funding it and watching how creating a new block with the regtest thing. I don't think this was everything. How much? Oh, we're missing a lot. That's fine. Cool. But let me get through that really quickly, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions. So again, I have Lightning CLI, and we can get info about it. And so that kind of prints out a bunch of info about this channel. And then I have another one called L2, and I can get info about that. So what I want to do is I want to connect L1 to L2. And then I want L1 to open a channel to L2. But first, in order to open a channel, I need L1 to have funds in it. Since these are since this script that I run uses basically the same directory every time, and they're persistent, and I was playing with this earlier, I think that L1 already has funds in it. And I actually think that I've already set up a channel between the two of them, which might be problematic. So I might have to restart this. That's okay. Let me check how badly. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop both of them. I'm going to remove that. And I'm gonna I'm just gonna start over, it's fine. So basically that, and then start, Cool. Should set them up. So now when I do L1 CLI list funds, there's nothing in it. Great, that's what we wanted. Okay, cool. So now what we want to do is we want to fund this channel. And there should be no peers. Yeah, so we're not connected to anything. Great, okay. So first what we want to do is we want to fund the channel. So I can use BTCLI as like my Bitcoin regtest CLI. So Bitcoin has like almost like the exact infrastructure in terms of having a CLI and then a Bitcoin D. So there's Bitcoin D and then there's Bitcoin CLI. So I've got a BT CLI that lets me talk to the BT CLI stuff. Cool. So, first I need to get a new address. Then I have BT CLI has money in it. Don't ask me how, it just does. I'm going to send the address. I'm just going to send this like 1 Bitcoin because that's the easiest thing to do. That's an invalid address. Yes, it is an invalid address. Great. And then so that block actually gets done, I need to generate to an address. I already have this in here. This address belongs to Bitcoin D. I don't really want to explain how this works, but the general idea is that we're generating a new block. So a new block will be created in mind because regtest is magic. This is the regtest magic. Basically, I'm telling it I want to make 1 block, and then the Coinbase that it pays out is going to pay to this address, which is the Bitcoin. This belongs to Bitcoin D, which is fine. Okay, so now there's a new block out, but I have to wait for L1 to pick up on it. So if we look here, we see that its block height is 921, and if we go to Bitcoin CLI, get chain tips. So they're the same height. Okay, cool. So it should already know about it. Great, look, we have some money now. Cool, so now we want to open a channel. Now that we've got some sats that we can put into a channel, so we need to connect to L2, but in order to do that, we need to know what L2's ID is. So we're going to copy that. Now we'll say L1 connect to L2. We need to tell it where. We happen to know that it's at 9090, which you can check here. Cool. Great, they're connected. Now we want to fund the channel, which we should be able to do. We need the ID. We need, at the bare minimum, we don't need this. We also need an amount to put in it. I'm just going to put the money. And then because this is regtest, you also need to give it a fee rate. Normally, you don't need to. I don't know, 253 is like the default that I use. It's fine. Great, now we've got a channel. Awesome. You can see that when I list peers, I've got like a channel open or waiting lock-in. So basically it needs 1 more confirmation, which means that the funding transaction that we created to make this channel needs to be buried at least 1 block. So we need to generate a block, and we can do that by calling generate block, generate to address. So this will make me a block. Boom. And then as soon as both nodes hear about it, we'll have an opening and functioning channel. While waiting for that to happen, we can make an invoice for, I don't know, these are in millisats, I think. So we can do like a bunch of millisats. I think I can do it. I think I can do like 1,000 sat. And then you need a label, and then we also need a description for an invoice. It says that it's not going to work. Any transaction blocked. Okay, so we've generated the invoice, and now we can pay it with this guy. Great, so now it's been paid, and we can see that it got paid by looking at list funds on the second. So this is the second node, if that makes sense. So we can look at list funds, and we can see that we actually have some money. We got the 1,000 sats that we just got paid from the invoice we made. Cool, okay, I am pretty much out of time now. I think there's like 6 minutes left. I really wanted to show you guys how the SQLite file stuff worked and how to lock down. You can like actually encrypt HSM secret. We didn't have time to get to plugins. We didn't have time to get to helpful make commands. Yeah. So the plugin stuff, I know that Christian and Rusty are both doing sessions for the Bolt-A-Thon that will be about plugins. So if you're interested in how plugin stuff works, you should definitely check out their stuff. Cool. Okay. Hey, Andrew, do we have any questions from the audience?
We actually don't have it right now, but we're gonna have to close this a little bit earlier.
Okay.
Um, you did a great job. Like like, how long? Okay, I do have one question. How long did it take you to get up to speed with C Lightning and all this stuff? Because this was super in depth and super informative.
Great. Yeah. Right. It was fast strike. We got through it super quick. Like probably a couple months, to be honest.
Wow. Okay, I feel like it would take me a couple years, but you
Um,
got it. You got it, Lisa.
yeah. Yeah.
Well,
And
thank you so much
honestly,
for. Uh-huh.
sorry. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And guys, we're still selling tickets to our next session. So if you're interested, next we have Fabrice, but I've got to log off and we've got to help set up his session real quick. So thank you so
All
much,
right.
Lisa.
Yep. Thanks, Andrew. Bye.
Bye.